Have you ever wondered how your favorite YouTubers and filmmakers make something that's seemingly boring look so cool in their cinematic sequences? Like when it seems like things like speed up and slow down and whip all over the place? Well, today I'm going to teach you exactly how that's done. First, I think we're going to need some music. Studio Dunnas, do you think we could get something, I don't know, a little groovy, kind of funky? Awesome, thanks. What is up, people? My name is Dunna, and today we're going to be talking about two really popular techniques that are used in filmmaking. You see them a lot on YouTube and a lot on like Instagram stories. We're talking about speed ramping and whip transitions. And if you combine those two techniques, you can make pretty much anything seem exciting. So, I'm not going to make you wait anymore. Let's get into it. Okay, so first things first, you have to understand what a whip transition is. One of the coolest things about the whip transition is that you don't really need any editing skills to make it happen. It all happens inside the camera. The idea is that when you point and focus at something and then you whip the camera away, because of how fast you're whipping it away, you're gonna get motion blur. So what you do is you focus on what you wanna focus on, and then as you're whipping it away, that's where you're gonna make your cut. And then in the very next shot, you're gonna make sure you whip in the same direction so that in the blur, that's where the transition is going to happen. Now you don't need to actually add any like effect transitions in Premiere or in Final Cut. You just need to make a cut where it happens and the blur will be the transition. It looks something like this. Now there are some people out there who are really good at this, and you have to kind of plan everything out because you need to know which way you're whipping out, which way you're whipping in, so that when you make those transitions, when you make those cuts, it's gonna all make sense and snip together well. So for example, between clip 1 and 2, you gotta make sure at the end of clip 1, you're whipping left, and then on the intro to clip 2, you're gonna have to whip left again. So there's a lot of planning that goes into it, but one thing that I noticed that's kind of cool is if you just kind of do a crazy whip all over the place and not in one direction, you can clip all of those together and you don't have to worry too much about having specific directions and planning it all out. So if you don't know where that specific clip is gonna go in the scheme of things, you're kind of covered because it's just like one big crazy blur. Now before we get to the speed ramping, because most of that actually happens in the computer, we're gonna have to get some shots. So like I said before, you can take anything that's just like kind of boring and normal and turn it into something that seems exciting with the music and with the transitions. So what I wanna do today is take my bookshelves at home that just have like some books and some plants and some decorations and try and make kind of a cool sequence out of those guys. So let's get some shots. Now I'm gonna start down here. I've got this shelf that has a bunch of like camera gear on it, but I need to get the scene a little bit more lit up to start with. So I grab my little aperture light and some gaff tape, and I'm gonna tape it up underneath. And I've got the orange gel on it to kind of give the scene a little bit more of a warm look. Just like that. So there's a lot more like light on the scene now. So make sure your scene is looking how you want it to. A couple things you want to make sure is that when you're doing this, you want your shots to be as smooth as possible when you're actually in the middle focused on the object itself. To make things a little bit more smooth, I'm going to actually shoot in slow motion. So I'm going to be shooting at 120 frames per second. If you're not sure how to do slow motion properly, there's a card up in the top corner. Go check that out. It'll be really helpful. If you already know how to do that, I'm shooting in 120p, and also you'll notice I have the strap on, which I don't always have, but it's going to allow me to create some pressure against my neck, and that'll keep things a little bit smoother as well. The third thing that I've done to make sure that things are going to be nice and smooth is I actually switched cameras. So this is my A6500 and I'm filming this with my A6000. To make things smoother, I switched cameras. The one that's on the tripod doesn't need to have stabilization because it's on a tripod. So I'm going to get some shots of these guys to start with, and then I'm basically just going to move around the living room and get some more shots of everything doing it all the same way. So as you can see, I look like a complete lunatic and the footage on its own doesn't look very good, but once we put it together, I promise it'll look good. So I'm gonna go around the living room and just get a bunch of shots of a bunch of different things and then we'll cut them all together. One thing to note is that I find I get better results generally if I set my camera in a manual focus. I focus on what I'm gonna do and then start whipping it around and make sure that I just keep kind of landing back in that same spot. And then that way I'm guaranteed to have my subject in focus when I actually get to the point where I want it to be in focus. All right, I think I have enough shots of everything, so let's head into the computer and I'll show you guys how to do the speed ramping part. Okay, so the first thing that we need to learn about is how to put together that whip transition. So let's hop in and we'll do that first. So first and foremost, as is the case with any sequence that you're gonna build, we're gonna need to pick the clips. So I've got 3 clips here that all go into each other. The second step after you've chosen your clips is to cut them where the blur happens, so where the whip actually happens. So we're gonna go through and do that. So you can see with this one, I whipped in from the left side and then I whipped out upwards. So we're gonna go right where we see it starting to blur. I'm gonna hit my right arrow to go frame by frame and pick a nice spot. I'm gonna pick right there. I'm gonna cut it and get rid of that first part. I'm gonna go find the end of it where it whips up. Use my right arrow to go through and left arrow to go back until I find right about there. I think will be a good spot. Get rid of that. Okay, and then the next clip. So this one's gonna come in from the bottom. So up, find a spot here, maybe right where we can start to see it. Make a cut. And then when it whips out to the left, make another cut right about there. And then this one's gonna whip in from the left. So we're gonna find a spot here right as it passes that other plant. So you can see how blurry it is while the whip is happening. So we're not gonna be able to notice when the transition happens because it's all just gonna be such a blur. And then finally we land on there and we can kind of just cut it wherever to end our sequence. So it's gonna look something like this. And so if we want to take that kind of to the next level, what we can do is I've already picked out 3 little whoosh sounds that we can put in there as well. So I'm going to put one at the start, one where that second transition happens, and one where the third one happens. And we've got this. Looks pretty good. Okay, so that's the basic whip transition. No speed ramping used there. That's all at full speed, not in slow motion or anything like that. So now we're gonna get on to doing the rest of the clips that are actually shot in slow motion, and we're gonna be speeding them up in certain places and slowing them back down in other places. So again, step 1 is to choose all our clips. So I've literally got all of the clips that I'm using all on a timeline here, and what we're gonna do is just go through all of them like we did in the last part, pick spots where we blurred it in and where we blurred it out, just get our clips first. So step 1 is to trim up the clips so that it's blurring on the way in, blurring on the way out. Okay, so I've made all my selections. I've left myself a lot of space on either side in the whole whip. So before, when I was just doing purely the whip transition, I was making the cut where the blur looked the best, but in this case I'm just leaving as much of the whip on the in and the out as possible. Because we're gonna be speeding that part up, it's not gonna matter that much what we're looking at. The blur is gonna happen regardless. So now what we're gonna do is actually go in and do the speed ramp part. So we're gonna take the first clip, and I'll use that as an example. So all these are in slow motion. So they were shot on 120 frames per second and we're playing back at 24. So it'll look something like this. And that's the part that we want. So if you right click on the clip at the very bottom of the menu, it might not be visible in my screen right now, but there's something called Show Clip Keyframes. and then we're gonna choose time remapping and speed. And what happened is you'll see on the clip there's a new line. So what we want to do is go to the point where we want the speed ramping to stop, and we're going to command click. That's on a Mac. I assume it's control click on PC, but if we command click, it makes a point. Then we can drag this line up, the part that we want to be sped up. We're gonna drag it up to about 1000%. Now we're gonna zoom back in on this, and you see these two little handles right here? We're gonna drag one of them to the right, and it's just gonna make the transition smoother. So we're going from this fast line, 1000% speed, down to its normal 100% speed. And then what we can do is we can fine tune this where we want it by dragging it back and forth. So that's looking pretty good. So we've got this crazy whip and then in. And then what we want to do is the same thing when we want to start whipping it out. So you can see where I'm starting to move away from the camera there. That's where I want the whip out to happen. So I'm going to make another point, command click, and then I'm going to drag the line up afterwards back to 1000%. I'm going to drag the right one out a couple, and then we should have a crazy whip out. So the whole clip looks something like this. And then we just need to apply that to each one. We can cut where the whip is depending on how much of that whip we want in and out. So I'm gonna go through and do that to each of these for now. Okay, so I applied the same concept to each clip. There was one in there where I felt like, because it's in slow motion and it's just a shot of like an inanimate object, I felt like it was going on for a little bit too long. So the nice thing about slow motion is that if you speed it up a little bit, as long as you were steady enough with your shot, it should still be okay. So I sped that up from 100%, which is super duper slow motion, up to like 250%, which is still technically slow motion, but a little bit less. So the transitions are looking pretty good as is, but what I want to go in now and do is just kind of trim them up. And this is where, if you were editing them to music, you could be trimming so that some of the cuts are happening on the beats of the music and make it a little bit more intense. It's something that you got to do a lot of practice with and you get better at over time. So we're just going to trim these up and then we're pretty much good to go. So there it is. We could go back in and do some more fine tuning if we wanted, if things weren't looking quite right, or once we get the music under there, we can go back in and adjust so that everything is looking just perfect. But for now, I think all the edits are looking good, and hopefully you're understanding the idea of speed ramping. So again, like we did with just the regular whip transition, you can add some sound effects under there. Whooshes and stuff like that sound really good. If you add those in there, it'll add a little bit more to it. It'll make you feel like you're really part of it. Throw some epic music under there and it should turn out something kind of like this. So that's it. That's how you take almost anything, inanimate objects like plants and books, and make them look really exciting. Combining the whip transition and the speed ramping technique is gonna allow you to get this fairly easily. It's a really simple concept that's really, really effective. I hope you learned a lot out of this. If you have any questions about this, make sure to let me know in the comments below. I'd love to have conversations with you guys and try and help you out more if I can. If you wanna let YouTube know to share this video around, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. It really does help. You can subscribe by clicking on the little circle icon, or if you want to watch the next video, check this one out. I think you'll really like it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.